Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we're very excited to welcome back Verano CIO Aaron Miles for a fast check-in on the state of cannabis and getting some updates on Verano, how it's navigating the current landscape, as well as potentially what might be ahead as we potentially are, lining up to see some federal changes. We'll have to wait and see. We will talk through all of it. A lot of good details, a lot of good highlights in there, including, some recent positive earnings. So we'll talk through it all today. If you're out there, though, I will recommend if you have a comment, if you have a question, you're always welcome to pop it in the chat and we will try to talk through as we get going. But I think, again, a lot to cover. It's an exciting time in the cannabis space again, which is great. So it's great to have you on, Aaron, to kind of walk through kind of what's going on and kind of what's going on behind the scenes with Verano as well.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Mackenzie. It's always exciting. It just depends on if it's good exciting or challenging exciting. But right now, I feel like we're kind of leaning in more towards the good exciting. But thanks for
It's
having me.
Of course, it's very nice and refreshing, I think, to be back in the exciting element of, yeah, exciting, you're right. The positive side of exciting ultimately. Well, then I'd love to start just sort of, I know we'll talk about sort of how things are moving on the federal side and kind of what we're looking at there, but would love to just start with Verano itself. I know you guys recently announced earnings relatively. Would love to just pull out some highlights there and kind of walk through kind of where Verano is set right now, because it seems like a good spot. So I'd love to
Yeah.
start there.
We were really proud of the results in Q2. Top line was probably a little softer, I think, than we would have, liked, but, we accomplished a lot in the quarter. And so 202 million on the top line, that was down 4% sequentially. And actually our retail was up 3% versus the prior year. It was the wholesale that really had a little bit of an impact on the top line. And what we have done, and we were a first mover, was really implement an accounts receivable strategy where we started to cut accounts off that weren't paying. I think you're seeing other industry participants start to pick up. So we were able to, in the quarter, reduce our accounts receivable balance by $9 million. So you can see that that's starting to take root. But also on the wholesale side, we hired a whole new team. We're developing a new structure around how we're approaching those markets. The accounts that we're selling into actually went up from 1,200 to 1,400. So while wholesale was down, we had an impact from an accounts receivable strategy. The pricing dynamics of some of these markets have also, I think, impacted wholesale, not only for us, but for people across the board. So, while the top line, as I said, was down sequentially, we actually looked at it as a huge positive because we feel that we're at a very much an inflection point where some of the strategies that we're putting in place are starting to take root. Now, the good news is gross profit came in at 113 million. So, and that was virtually in line with the prior year on a much higher revenue base, and we were up 13% versus the prior quarter. And also the good news is that SG&A was relatively flat in comparison to the first quarter, so we were able to increase gross profit and keep SG&A flat, which drives a lot of efficiencies in the business, which is where we got to our 33% margin profile in the quarter, 66 million on adjusted EBITDA. So really happy. At the end of the day, you got to make money, right? And so it's nice that some people can try to pad the top line, but when we can drive efficiencies throughout the business and really show that efficiencies, even in a little bit more of a trying time on the top line, to show that we're still capable of being, if not the one of the most efficient companies in the space. So, as I said, we're really happy with what we accomplished in the quarter, just from a pure financial perspective. But we also tightened up the balance sheet. We made $16 million of debt repayments in the quarter. I get a lot of questions on capital allocation strategy, and a lot of people want to see a big share repurchase announcement go out there. But if you actually look at what we've done with our cash over the last year, we acquired Virginia and Arizona. That was a huge cash outlay from the cannabis company. But as part of that deal, we issued a seller's note, and we were able to negotiate part of a repayment of that seller's note at 75% of face value, which saved us $4 million. So it doesn't necessarily catch the headlines as some of the other things that we could do, but we're doing what we feel is in the best interest of our shareholders. So we're driving efficiencies to the bottom line. We're really tightening up the balance sheet, with getting really creative with some things that we're doing to save the company money. But we feel that we're and I know we say this quite a bit, but positioning ahead of future growth. We think the back half of the year can be a big one for Verano, and so we're excited.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. It's, I think, very easy sometimes to go for the flashier or the splashier thing ultimately, but I think having that strong strategy that you're kind of plowing ahead while you're kind of nipping and tucking along the way ultimately is the way to approach it. And I think, again, has yielded good results. So I think that's great to see. You mentioned sort of the new markets a little bit getting into. Would love to kind of touch base on sort of the state story for a little bit, kind of talking about the markets. Were there any highlights to pull out in terms of strong markets? Any sort of stories there in terms of, trends you're seeing, anything on that front?
Yeah, I mean, Florida is always a monster for us. And, last year we went through a very painstaking, retrofit of our Apollo Beach facility. It's 220,000 square foot indoor grow facility down there. And, on a side note, not all the grows in Florida are the same. And so one of the things that set us apart, and this is something that, I think we're really focusing in on, which is going to, show up in the numbers here, is quality of product. If you're not putting a good product out there, it's you can see all the products behind me. We had a lot of product launches in the quarter, and especially in the vape categories. I mean, we're grabbing top 5 market shares in a lot of the markets that we operate in, and number one in a lot of markets that we're operating in. And so Florida is not naive to that. I mean, we've held on to that number 2 position, and we've done that while being very, I would say, rational in those markets. A lot of people will discount to grab market share. Again, we're in the business of making money. And I hope our shareholders can appreciate that. So Florida was a big market for us. If you look at the OMMU data, we've held a really strong number 2 position in that market, and that's not by accident. That's by design. And then another thing, and I know we'll probably touch on regulation, I would assume at some point during
Mhm.
this, but Florida is also a market that we've invested a lot of dollars in. So last year we got a little over our skis. We thought, it was going to flip to adult use,
Mhm.
which we quantified at the time as probably $300 to $450 in additional top line revenue in a higher margin state. But we bought a third facility, and we invested tens of millions of dollars in that. So while you have to sit on that investment right now, as we start to see things progress in Florida, it's kind of nice to be ahead of the game in that front as well. So Florida's a big market for us. Illinois is our home state, and a state that we don't take for granted. It's obviously had some challenges with oversupply in the markets, and I would say some pricing compression, but we've definitely held our own. And I think you're starting to see our presence go back into that market. As a reminder, I mean, when adult use turned on, I mean, we were the leader in that market in January of 2020, and through some ebbs and flows, we've dropped down in market share, but I feel like we're really gaining that back in those markets. New Jersey is another state. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, to kind of combat that, what's the approach to kind of win that back? Is it ultimately offering new products that people are interested in, want to try? Is it just reinforcing the quality and really having something that people know that when they go to you, they're going to have a good experience? What's sort of the way to kind of, earn that back? Because it is difficult in competitive markets, obviously.
It's the way the company was built. I mean, George, among other things, has restaurants, right? And one of his restaurants makes pancakes. It's like big deal, right? But if you
Mhm.
make a high quality product, you have people, literally lining up around the block for pancakes and maple syrup. And so, we can put things in flashy packaging, but if that quality of product isn't there, then we're nothing, right? And so Verano's always been a top tier, product category, and we've also created variety. We used to be just a premium only flower. We're now, in that value, in that mid tier brand. So it's creating optionality, but it's also creating quality. You have to have that consistency. So when you go in and you're buying a certain strain, it needs to be that consistent, almost like Starbucks. Like you can get, I'm a matcha guy, so it's like no matter where I'm at, it always tastes the same. And I appreciate that consistency. And I'm not likening us to Starbucks, but I think the quality of product is what drives that. We can come up with all the strategies in the world, but if you're not putting a high quality product in that packaging, customers are going to tell you, and they're going to tell you with their wallet. And so, we'll put our product up against anybody in the market, and that's why you are starting to see, market, kind of like stabilization in markets for us. But then you're also seeing us get really creative on 2 gram vape carts that we're launching. We're listening to our customers. We are in a position now where 2016 we all guessed, right, like what does the consumer want. Well, now we're able to absorb a lot more data, and we're becoming more sophisticated, and so we are absorbing that. And then the output of that is new kind of product categories. But then it's also, again, comes down to the basics. You do the simple things the right way, and you put out a high quality product, your customers will come back.
That sounds like a solid strategy. Okay, I was just curious. I feel like more states are starting to develop and mature, which is great. Again, I think we're seeing more states come online.
So mhm.
So I imagine that's sort of a trend that could potentially continue. But again, if you're able to compete in that area, I think that's great, and that makes sense in terms of
Well, and I'll
approach.
say this too, Mackenzie. Cannabis can be really intimidating, right? So as you want to grow your market, um, you have to have entry points for everybody, right? And it could
Yep.
be a first time user, it could be somebody who is a very sophisticated user. We need to be a kind of a jack of all trades for all the consumers, and so that's where I think that market growth is going to come. Is is maintaining those legacy users who understand what a terpene profile is and understands that sometimes it's not always about the THC content. If you get a good indica and it's only 22%, but it really hits right, like, you want to tailor to that specific, kind of sophisticated user. But then you have somebody who's like, I heard from a neighbor that if I take a gummy, I can sleep at night. Well, you're
Yeah.
probably not going to start them at the guap gummies that we have, which are 25, 50s, and 100s. And I even avoid those. And so, but you want to have like a more balanced approach, more with the bits line that we would have, which have adaptogens, and it's a softer approach. So I think, again, absorbing that data, and I give a lot of, I don't do this often for David Spreckman, but him and in the marketing department have done a fantastic job of really absorbing data and, really creating new product categories that I think can hold on to the current consumer base, but also, be a really easy entry point for others. So.
Yep, that's fantastic. I do think there's more and more people who are obviously turning on to cannabis just because they are, realizing it's not this back alley kind of exchange thing anymore. It is a real business. And I think we've seen those trends continue. And I'm sure there are some amount of people who stick with the gummies. They just want it for sleep, or they just want it for back pain or whatever. But I'm sure there are also people who, realize it's not that bad and kind of drift up into more complex users, I guess, ultimately over time. So having something for everyone is a great idea. So that's fantastic. Generally, you mentioned Jersey. What's going on in Jersey?
Jersey was always, we were a first mover in Jersey, and Jersey's a bit, always a big market for us. I think you're seeing some rationalization in that market. Like, and it's funny because we had such an explosion when adult use turned on. There was only 13 adult use dispensaries. And, that does really drive some of the challenges year over year comps, because as that market rationalizes and more dispensaries come online, I think you're starting to see, some of that rationalization take root. So going over, throughout the next couple of years, I think you'll start to see, better comps year over year and get a better idea of how that market's growing. But Jersey for us has and will always be a very, that was a license win for us. We didn't have to acquire. We built that, I say from the ground up. We retrofitted an old Walmart facility, but it's one of our motherships. It's one of the state of the art facilities that we have. So we're really proud of what we're doing in New Jersey. And speaking of an explosion in, like a Virginia, there's only 5 HSAs and really 4 are operating. And so when you think about what an adult use turn on in that market could look like, it could feel very similar to a New Jersey turn on. So we're definitely investing dollars in the Virginia market. That's been a great acquisition for us. The cannabis, phenomenal partner to deal with and work with. And, kudos to them for what they're doing right now. But, Virginia was a big market for us as well.
That's fantastic. So you mentioned that, and it makes me think obviously of Pennsylvania as well. How do you see that turning on? Do you see that similar to Jersey? What's the sort of thought there? It seems like they're moving away from sort of the state model of kind of alcohol, which is, I think, a net positive. What's your sort of thought on
Yeah.
Pennsylvania?
I would say Pennsylvania would remind me a lot of an Arizona, right? A very built, sophisticated medical market that has been waiting for adult use turn on for a couple of years. So
Yes.
it's a market where, it's almost oversaturated at this point because so many people have continued to position ahead of adult use. And you're like, well, what are you guys waiting for? There's so much
Yeah.
tax revenue that's leaving the state. And you look at the Jersey border, the Ohio border. I mean, there's a lot that revenue that's leaving the state of Pennsylvania. But again, we're hearing good things, and we will be ready. I mean, we have 18 dispensaries in PA. We have a really solid stacked tiered facility in Chester. But I think it could be a very similar turn on kind of process to an Arizona, where adult use gets approved and then the market quickly turns on because the market's going to be able to absorb what that adult use demand is going to be. New Jersey, we were pulling people in from different states. I mean, it was like we had 7 days to prepare for an adult use turn on, and it was like, we put a lot of stickers on a lot of packages during those couple of days. But what I will say is, for us, when you think about who the leaders in this space are, I mean, we're a leader in adult use turn on. I mean, we led the charge in Illinois. You think about New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, Ohio. Like, we have done this time and time again. And the best part about what we're doing is we're fine tuning our blueprint for adult use turn on. So when you think about like what a Florida flip looks like, people are like, they're looking for that to save their business. We're looking at that to really start to drive the future growth of this business. So again, when we quantify $300 to $450 million in the top line of what a Florida flip could be, and that's literally just a flip of the switch for adult use, and we've invested tens of millions of dollars in that already. Like, we're ready for adult use there. We're ready for adult use in Virginia. We're ready for adult use in PA. And so when you think about upside in these markets, and you think about the upside that we have and what we've proven to be able to do, like, we'll make the hard decisions, right? So many people are scared to lose market share because they're scared to invest in an outdated facility. We aren't. Like, we'll take that step back. And, again, I read comments, I see how we got beat up in the market, but people are starting to see that strategy start to take root. So we want to be very aggressive in our strategy ahead of these adult use turn-ons, and PA, Florida, and Virginia are going to be those markets that we're really focused on.
No, I think that totally makes sense. And I think you're right. Having that practice of being able to flip that switch is hugely important, especially in those key markets, Pennsylvania and obviously Florida as well. I would love to talk a little bit about kind of the federal side, what's changing, because I'd imagine hopefully it would make it easier, for the state side if we do see some federal movement to make some real changes. I know a lot of these states already, I think, should be making these changes already. I'm following Pennsylvania very deeply in terms of their transit issue. So I feel like they do need money for tax dollars for, patching certain areas. But if we do see something federally change, I'd imagine that makes it a lot easier potentially for some of these states to come online. Again, we've gotten last Monday, a bit of a time gauge from the new administration in terms of when we might see a response on rescheduling. How are you as a kind of company taking that on? Positioning one way or the other, or are you just sort of saying, "We've seen this before and we're continuing on"? What's sort of the strategy there?
I was going to joke and say, what federal news? I haven't paying attention, but we've been positioning this for years, right? I mean, when you think about what your general strategy is when you go public in the U.S. and you want to transition into the U.S., you pay attention to what's going on and what certain dominoes falling means for the business, right? So we applaud this administration for taking a hard look at this.
Mhm.
We're not going to get too far over our skis or try to push the envelope here, and we're just going to be ready to take advantage of things that could potentially open up for us. And on the capital market side, I work for the New York Stock Exchange, so very familiar with what the benefit of an uplisting would look like for us. But it's one of the things that we did. I read a lot of comments about, like, what exchange we should be on, and TSX versus CBO versus a CSE. And while it's great that you might get a little bit of custody in the TSX, for us, going to the CBO was a very strategic move that we did a couple of years ago. We're on a senior exchange.
Mhm.
We have all our opinion letters written for all the states that we're operating in. And so I think that was a very undervalued move that we made, because what we are now in position to do is move more quickly into the US. We looked at the TSX, but we would have had to have acquired an international asset. We would have had to have, restructured the business and unwind certain things. And then when you want to get back into the US, you have to unwind those things again and then kind of restructure the business again. And so for us, when it comes to the SIBO, it was a very clean transaction for us. So that's one of the things that we're really positioning for, is that move into the capital markets. And we're also getting ready to pounce on really any investor that wants to have a conversation with us right now. I mean, we've seen green in these markets the last couple of days, and or last couple of weeks actually, and it's been really nice to see. But we're not taking that for granted, because results are going to drive market reactivity, right, going forward. But right now, I think people are starting to get excited about what this potential moves could be at the federal level.
Mhm.
But for us, we're trying to clean some things up, right? And I think one of the big overhangs that we had was, that Vireo litigation that was announced in May of last year. And for us, we had to be very careful, right? They were very active and very vocal on a lot of the social
Mhm.
media channels, and we took time to let facts speak for themselves, let our litigation process play out. And so, we're at a point right now where, on our last earnings call, I think we were pretty aggressive in our stance that we're comfortable with where we're at. We have a history of closing acquisitions. We had 18 acquisitions closed in 2021 alone. So to say we had buyer's remorse is a little bit laughable, because we didn't. I mean, we have been very aggressive on the M&A front. I think we're the leader in that space for getting deals closed. And so for us, there was just some new light that kind of came to the forefront, where we felt it was really time to start pushing back and really stating our case, where we feel that we are in line for a $15 million termination fee, $3 million in legal fees, and additional damages that are kind of yet to be quantified as we're allowing that discovery process to play through. So I think that was an overhang on our stock that we're really trying to be a little bit more aggressive on. I think the debt refi as well, I think has been, I hear some chatter around that, oh my gosh, there's concerns that Verano is not going to get their debt refi done. And it's literally coming from companies who have sale leasebacks. And what's funny
Mhm.
for us is that we don't. So we could go rip that card anytime that we wanted to, but we're not, because it's in the best interest to keep that real estate unencumbered, because we can tap into that from a capital markets perspective. So, and we said on our call, like, we're very comfortable with where we're at in the debt refi process. But I will say that we're just going to continue to, fight the good fight. And we're not going to worry about what, some people on Twitter are saying. We have a business to run. And what it comes down to is efficiencies and pushing that to the bottom line. So I think capital markets would open up for us. As I said, given my background and the expertise of our legal team, I think we'll be ready to pounce, probably be a leader in that space, with the transition in the U.S. capital markets. And then business wise, how do you quantify what could potentially happen, right? Because now you're starting to talk about, does credit cards come into play? Do
Yes.
advertising, does marketing, credit card basket sizes just naturally go up when credit cards are, I spend more money. Like if I have to have old cold hard cash in my hand, it's a little bit easier. And when you're just swiping, a piece of plastic. And so,
Mhm.
so I think, those would have a massive benefit to our business. And, you start to think about what other regulations could start to come to the forefront. McConnell signed the hemp bill, the Farm Act, and I don't think he actually understood what he was doing at the time because of the conversion to the obviously THC derived hemp. So if you start to take some of those gummies out of gas stations and you start to put them into the legal channels, or THCA flower, which could be this is where it's challenged, right? Because I think you start to see us get blended in with some of this what we call dirty weed in the industry, right? Like, and we're regulated from seed to sale, no pesticides, all that stuff. So I think there is massive opportunities here that I probably can't even be quantified if you're going to start to push some of this kind of shady stuff into the legal channels, and then if you start to use credit cards, you start to use other channels to market your products could be huge.
Yeah, I think the idea is to make it have less friction to basically be in the legal channels where it's tested, regulated, all those things, and trying to reduce ultimately whether it's hemp or even just sort of illicit grows. I know we've seen a lot of the kind of shutdowns recently on that front as well, which I'd imagine is sort of a net positive for the legal side of the industry, just broadly, ultimately kind of reducing that supply in the illicit side of things. Again, hopefully we do see things change and kind of shift in trend like we've seen in Canada, where we've seen a lot of move from the illicit side. Obviously, they don't have the hemp thing, but illicit side to more of the regulated channels. I think just as people get more comfortable with it, understand it, I think it's almost like a state turning on, where when a state turns on, sometimes a lot of people know about it, but a lot of the times it's just a few people know about it, then more and more people, then more and more people. So I think it's something that will change over time.
Well, think about
Um,
the irony here. You think about a state like Indiana, right? I just talked to a guy. My wife and I traveled last weekend, and we were talking to this guy who's in Indiana, and he's like, I want my cannabis. So, and it's funny how much hemp derived cannabis is available in a state like Indiana, and people are literally getting arrested going
mhm.
into other states and buying legal tested cannabis and coming back into the state, and the cops are like, wait a minute, you have cannabis, that's illegal. And the stuff is selling in gas stations. So I think there's a long way to go in some of these areas, but it's all about the safety of the consumer, and it's all about education, safety, and making sure that the consumer is always taken care of. And these other avenues aren't doing that right now. So
Yeah, I think that takes a little bit of time, but also it takes education. I'm sure, the industry as a whole will kind of communicate that over time so people understand the differences. All those things I think are important, of course. Also, Pete, thanks for the comment. That's great. I was just holding. Good support. Love to see it.
thanks, Pete V. All right.
Well, so that's actually a little bit of a question I wanted to tie into. Sort of, as we're positioning potentially on the precipice of change, we'll have to wait and see. Is there a way that you're speaking to investors now, whether they've been in the cannabis fight for a long time and kind of have been through the highs and lows of cannabis versus, new investors who are looking at it maybe for the first time? I know we've seen a lot of coverage on the cannabis side following Trump's comments. How are you sort of speaking to both sides of the cannabis experience for investors?
Yeah, I think it's almost like what I talked about with our product portfolio, where you have to almost, you make sure that your current customer base is happy with the products that you're putting into the market, but then you have to start advertising for these new consumers to come in because you want growth in your markets. And it's the same thing with the investors. Like I spend a lot of time, George spends a lot of time, Rich, our CFO, spends a lot of time, working with our investors to understand the ebbs and flows in this business, right? Like I've worked at Fortune 50 companies, and it would be like we would do yearly updates with our investors because the businesses are so methodical and regulations in place, but there's so many moving pieces to this that you need to make sure that everybody is understanding your story as crystal clear as it can, because there also is a lot of misinformation out there. I mean, I touched on a few of those, and so you're always fighting some of the rumors that are out in the market. But so for us, I'm seeing investors have walked away, but some of those investors are starting to come back with a little bit of interest. So I think you've had You had an early explosion in the markets in 2018, 2019, where there were some bigger investors in that ended up just walking away. And those are starting to resurface. Now, the bigger investors, like the big institutions, it's kind of yet to be, determined, when or if they will come into these markets. But I mean, listen, I'm like a stockbroker. I pick up my Rolodex and I make phone calls, and whoever will talk to me will, I'll try to get in front of. But people have to understand how this is going to grow. And I sat in front of an investor a couple of years ago at a conference, and he ran a $15 billion fund. And he asked me a really interesting question. He's like, how do you get to a 15, 20, $25 billion market cap? And just saying North Carolina's turning on and we're going to try to, get into that state, or just a Florida flip, I mean, I understand the multi-state opportunity, but we have to make sure that investors understand how this industry is going to grow and what the opportunities are. And because there's a lot of misinformation out there, especially from some of the proponents in DC. And people are scared to look at this space, but it's a huge opportunity. I mean, I've been in this for 8 years, and I have a lot of capital markets experience. And if I was sitting on the other side of that table, I would be excited right now. And I would also know what questions I would be asking on the other side. So we're trying to answer those in a lot of what we do. I mean, we had state level disclosure out there. Nobody followed suit, but we did that because we want to be relied upon for the information that we're putting into the markets. And so I think there is a lot of conversations that are being had with investors, but probably more to come. I think people probably want a little bit more certainty before they, dip their toe in the water. And we got to understand, like, we drink the Kool-Aid every day. I'm cannabis 100%, and it's me, pay attention to me. But when you're a portfolio manager and you have 200 companies pass over your desk, and it's gaming and crypto and technology and this, and all of a sudden we're like, spend a ton of time on an industry you can't invest in. It's kind of hard to get their attention. But once you see those dominoes start to fall, as you said, I mean, if something happens on a bigger scale, I think that gives, other states a lot more comfortability in potentially moving towards a program, or maybe, it's flipping over to adult use, but that's also going to have a big capital markets effect as well.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And do you think basically that first main hurdle obviously is on the rescheduling side? Do you think that's enough for a lot of people to kind of clear that compliance element? Or do you see that kind of, waterfalling as hopefully we see more coming along, or just even taking time to kind of digest and understand the industry?
It's kind of yet to be determined. And so, obviously I'll be careful to give an answer one way or
Sure.
another, but I think it makes those phone calls that I'm going to be making a lot more, maybe not valuable, but impactful, probably is a
Mhm.
better way to put that, where we can say, now we can point to something, right? Because right now there's a lot of uncertainty, and, a lot of people are taking victory laps and, jumping up and down, but we know in this space, nothing's done until it's done. And I mean, look at us. We were on the MSCI index for 2 days, and then that rug got pulled out from underneath us. And that was one of the biggest reasons for getting onto a senior exchange. So listen, that one hurt, but listen, I've been hurt a lot in this space, and we got some thick skin, and luckily we have products, especially some of the ones behind me, that help me get through my days. So,
That's fantastic. I was going to say, what would you point to? What is your top most used current thing that you're excited about if someone's looking behind?
I would say this over here. Well, no, there we go. Nope. This
Oh,
way. Okay. I'm all reversed here. I would say the Savvy. I would say, our vape lines have been tremendously well received into the market. And I think it's, from the 2 gram carts we got to some of the disposables. I think, because think about this too, like when you're a high quality premium flower player, and then you have a quote unquote value, you're not growing with any different flower. It's just the process to get it to final form is a little different, more automation, less hand trimming. You're using more rad machines and stuff like that to trim your plants. But it's still, like, I would put our value up against some people's premium. So I would say the vapes are great. The bits line, that nope, yep, nope. There we go.
hard
Right.
words. Always hard. Yeah.
We didn't practice this in the pre-show, so
We
that's
should
but
have.
we should have, yeah. But I would say the bits line, with what we've done there, they're 5 milligrams, and we have it from, when you wake up in the morning with our guava goes, coffee beans, and stuff like that, all the way up to the pomegranate R&Rs, where it's going to be more relaxing and help, kind of from a sleep, all the way into the middle where we have our yuzu zone, which is more of like a hybrid with these, yuzu in there. But like, we're getting creative with adaptogens. I know me. I mean, every morning I wake up and I got 20 supplements that I'm taking, and it's like my Vimergy zinc and this and that. And so if you
Mhm.
can actually have a product that also it changes the experience for you. So I think the Bits line is really good. And then again, we don't have a lot of, of our actual premium flower behind us, but again, that's our bread and butter. That's that's when you open that jar and you smell that and you're like, yeah, that's Verano quality flower right there. So I'd say that's probably all of it's great. Don't get me wrong, and I would encourage everyone to buy it all. But
There you go.
for me,
Do
that's
a
kind of
fight.
what I would look.
That's awesome. Love it. Okay, I'm seeing some questions in here. Let me see if I can pull them up, which really quickly. So one is from Braindead, which is mentioning sort of the Arizona market. In Arizona, they say sales are down, but that more weed is being sold generally just due to the price per gram. How do you fight those margins or when the whole market lowers their price? So that's an interesting question. I think that's been an industry thing. I know obviously Arizona may be focusing as well, but any sort of high level thoughts on preserving margin?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Braindead. So
Mhm.
I would say Arizona is a small snippet of the overall picture that I gave in the beginning, right? Like you
Mhm.
see the top line, 202 million, but when you can increase your gross profit by 13% sequentially, that shows a lot of efficiencies that you can drive in your business, right? Like we can't sit there and cry that pricing's coming down. There's always going to be natural price compression in a market. So how do you combat that? You take dollars, you invest in automation, you invest in more efficiencies throughout the business. You have time to now evaluate, like, how you're operating certain stores. Again, George, with his hospitality background,
Mhm.
has been instrumental. He never had to figure out the hospitality aspect, and he's a real estate guy too. So he was always at a table with a lot of lawyers and bankers, and George is like, I'm an operator. Like, let's get my construction team ready to rock. And so I would say the efficiencies that we're able to drive through our business is really how we combat that. And the good news is as you're seeing markets normalize and potentially seeing consolidation in certain markets, and you see stabilization and maybe increase in pricing, that's where it's almost like, think about this, like, our facilities have fixed costs to them. And so when you get to an economies of scale kind of concept, right? So like we'll use Apollo Beach, for instance, 220,000 square feet. Well, there's fixed costs there. There's HVACs and
Mhm.
lighting and everything else that goes on there. But if you can sell more product out of that facility, the costs are staying fixed. The margin expansion is what you'll start to realize as you start to sell more product into those markets. And so if we can get efficient right now when in a pricing compression type of market, if we can start to rationalize and normalize some of the pricing, you can see that we're definitely set to take advantage.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you see that trend reversing at all on the other again, if we were to see on the other side of rescheduling or things kind of getting more normal? Any sort of general thoughts? Again, I know it's hard to predict, obviously, and it sounds like you're managing well, but any thoughts there?
It is. It's like a tidal wave, right? I think you see some and you start to get comfortability, looking at
Mhm.
BDSA data, and you're like, okay, we finally bucked the trend here. And then the grower shows up and they got to justify a sale lease back, or they got to justify investments that they made into their facility, and then they just flood the market. And it just shows some of the players are very unsophisticated. But
Mhm.
as you get that flushed out, I think that's where you're going to see that normalization. But it's really hard to predict because it does really ebb and flow in a lot of the markets. But again, what it comes down to, if you're putting out a product that people just absolutely have to have, and it's not like, well, I can get the same quality product at a much cheaper price over there. They have to have it, right? Because it's such an outlier. That's on
Mhm.
us to produce that product, and that's on us to do that. And if we actually do accomplish that, which we are in a lot of the markets, then it kind of helps on the pricing front.
That makes total sense. All right, that's fantastic. Second question here is tell us about M&A discussions with non-cannabis companies if they exist. So that's interesting. I know we talk a lot about M&A kind of generally or entering new markets or all those things, but with non-cannabis companies, it's kind of an interesting angle on that front.
Yeah, and I, obviously have to be careful and not,
Of course.
disclose too much of what my Rolodex looks like. We'll just keep
Sure.
it to, but it is an old school one that flips, so, but
Awesome.
and that's a joke. But I will say this, M&A front, it is on me, George, and everybody at this company to have as many conversations as we possibly can, right? To sit here and think, 15, 20, 30 years from now that, we might be in the current kind of framework, I think might be a little bit naive. And so we've had a lot of really solid strategy discussions internally about how this industry can transform. So again, when you think about it, there's really not a lot of headlines that we can print, but we're running an option offense, and so given like whatever the market gives us, we'll kind of run the play based off of that. And so from an M&A perspective, you can imagine a lot of people outside of cannabis are interested in this, but again, you're in that kind of limbo where not a lot of people can really have serious discussions. I mean, for us, I mean, think about this, like, we moved office spaces a couple of years ago, and it was really hard for us to find an office space because these landlords couldn't rent to us because then they would lose their mortgage. And so now you start to think about adjacent industries trying to invest in this space. I mean, there's a massive impact to what their banking could look like, I didn't even mention that. I mean, my God, we
Mhm.
had $69 million in cash. And, obviously would love that it would have been a lot higher, like massive cash outlay in the quarter. Again, I touched on all those, but like we're earning zero interest on any of that.
Yeah.
So you think about that, like I earn more interest in my checking savings account than Verano does as a business.
Mhm.
And it's just kind of crazy. But, these other companies I think are a little hesitant at times too. Just I think it's more information gathering right now, but we're looking at everything.
That makes perfect sense. I do think a lot of these other kind of industries are kind of keeping an eye on cannabis because I do see a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth there, just because I think there's been trends that have significantly shifted things towards cannabis, but makes
Well,
sense in terms of
I'll
being
say this
small.
too, Mackenzie. I think
Yeah.
this industry, and we've been guilty of this as well, moves too quick at times. And it's like let's really develop a really solid strategy, right? Like look at international. I mean, Germany flips the wreck, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, we're missing out on all this." But you're like, do you know how fragmented Europe is? And I mean, look at like Italy has a tender program, Spain's different, Portugal's different, like Germany. What are you going to do, right? And so for us it's taking time to really evaluate what opportunities look like and make sure that you're not having buyer's remorse or having that look back to go, okay, if we'd have taken a little bit more time, and let things develop a little bit more, we'd have been a little bit more strategic interaction. So I think that's where we're at right now. I think we're going to let things develop, and if people want to have a conversation, they know how to get in touch with me. So
I think that's fantastic. All right, one more question, last final question in there in the mix, but again, appreciate all these questions from, yeah, also Africa is opening some markets. That's a good point. Pete is asking, would operations in Florida under the Verano brand help the brand recognition and eventually stock price? That's there.
It's an interesting question. I would say the Move brand in Florida was one of the reasons we were so attracted to the Ultimate deal. I mean,
Mm,
they were the leader by far from a private company perspective, and sometimes it's best to say I don't know best, and to allow the market to naturally respond to what was already a leader in that space. So for us to come down there and put the Verano Zenly flag in the Florida ground and say, we're going to take over Florida, it might not have been well received. And so we did a lot of market research, and we did a lot of, case studies to see, do we actually start to rebrand down there? And there's a very, very low, think about it, it's medical. And what we grow, we have to sell in our dispensaries. And so there's a very loyal base there. And so when you start to change this, there could be, some other impacts to that. I don't think changing to Zenleaf would necessarily have a stock market impact. I think just Florida in general has an impact on our stock price because people are starting to understand how strong we are down in that state. A
mhm.
lot of people can talk, but we always point to the facts and the figures. So Florida's been, we're number two down there for a reason, and I think over time, I don't think it's unheard of to see, retail. I mean, look at the McDonald's of the world, Starbucks. I mean,
Mhm.
there's always some type of shift or refresh or something like that. But right now, we're really happy with the move in Florida.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I definitely think obviously Florida is an important market, but I imagine that's true nationally as well of really establishing those brands, that relationship, that trust with consumers, people ultimately, because I think that makes a big difference when things turn on a federal side. So we'll have to wait and see there. But I think that's fantastic. All right. Well, I feel like this has been great, Aaron, just to kind of walk through what's been going on. I know it's been, again, very busy, very crazy. Hopefully, again, in a positive way. We'll have to wait and see. Any kind of final thoughts to leave us with in terms of, how people should be staying in touch and tuned? I know a lot of people who are on are probably closely following the cannabis space, but for
Sure.
anyone who's new, what would you kind of point us to?
Yeah, I would say this. I mean, obviously, a lot of information on investors.verano.com. Check out our Zenleaf stores. If you're outside of Florida, check the Move stores out. You can go to verano.com and get a lot of information on our products and our dispensaries. But, just understand that, we're working hard every day, and we don't take any day for granted. And I know people are heavily invested in this space, and we have a lot of emotions behind that investment. I mean, we're also internally heavily invested in this. And we want to see this work out. And so, we're working as hard as we can, and we understand that the quality of product and the results are going to speak a lot more to our investors than me having a conversation with you. But, we're going to continue to work on that. But, we do feel that we're a leader in this space. Again, the way that we built the business, no sell leasebacks, the efficiencies and the bottom line, and the way that we're able to really drive this business, we feel that we're one of the best positioned companies going forward from a tier one perspective. But we're excited, and but again, nothing for granted, and we're not taking any victory laps yet. So. So
I think that's good. Keeping the foot on the gas is definitely important. I think putting up numbers that are strong, obviously very important as well. But I also think an important element, especially in this time, is doing that work to communicate, share the message, have that communication with investors or potential new investors. I think that makes a difference. I need some water. Makes a difference, in the current time. So I think that's really important. So I appreciate you taking the time for sure. Everyone, thanks for joining us as well. Really appreciate you joining. Really appreciate your questions. They are great. But I think with all that said, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we will catch you next time. Thanks so
sounds
much.
great. Thanks, Mackenzie, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.